Okay, ladies, so I did have to take this heat shield out behind the coil packs. Those bolts are pretty annoying to reach, so you're going to need, I just used a small 1/4 inch with a T30, and there's 3 bolts. You'll have to feel them with your hand and kind of guide it in there to make sure that you grab it. Pretty annoying, but we got it out, so that's good. So now we have here the little turbo. It's actually not too small, but anyway. Going to take out this V-band here. Going to take out both O2 sensors, and so I can take out the downpipe. And then under here you can see there are 5 bolts, and just below those there's a rail. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll kind of point it here. There's 5 more bolts, kind of staggered. Actually, there's 6 bolts on top, and there's 5 bolts on the bottom. So once we get the downpipe out, actually none of them look hard to get to at all. This might be the easiest part of the install. I can't tell for sure, but we're definitely making good progress. So the next thing I'm going to do is work on getting this downpipe out. I'm probably going to have to take out the mid pipes too. So I'm going to crawl under the car and unbolt that. I'm not going to get into all that. You can check out the downpipe install if you already put a downpipe in, which you already have. If you're thinking about doing a hybrid, then you already know what to do down there. So I'm going to go ahead and unbolt that V-band and take out the downpipe, and then come back to this. Alright guys, welcome back. So I got some good news. I got the hybrid away from the motor, which is great. Sorry I didn't record that, but honestly there's nothing really to it. There's 6 of these bolts right on the top. They take I believe it's a 12, or let me see. It is a 11 millimeter, I believe. That takes those off, and once they come off, you have to kind of fight with it a little bit and kind of push it forward and slide it up to get the turbo manifold off of there. But that was honestly probably the easiest part of doing this, was actually getting the hybrid loose. Now what the hard part was actually taking off the lines, and I want to bear with me, sorry guys. I want to try to show you what happened to me, so hopefully you can avoid the same thing happening to you, because it was pretty rough. So I'm going to get under the car here. You can see I did loosen the downpipe. It's just sitting in there. You don't need to take it all the way out. I took the mid pipes out, and this is just kind of sitting in there. Now up in here, I'm going to show you the lines that you have to take out. This is the oil return line, or the oil drain, actually. This one was super easy to take out. It's just 2 bolts, and that pops right off. There's a gasket in there. Your kit should come with a new gasket, but if not, you're probably going to want to save that one. And then you have the oil feed, and then that one up there, you can still see the metal that's actually the oil return line, but it's right next to that oil return line, that hole right there. And what I didn't know was that was the coolant feed line. And so I undid that one and pulled it out, and I literally got a mouthful and eyeful and faceful of coolant, and it is the most disgusting thing I have ever tasted in my entire life. So be cognizant of that. If you're going to pull out that coolant line from the block, you're probably going to want to block it up with something. I wasn't prepared for that, so I actually lost all of my coolant. I tried to block it up, but I couldn't find something in time before most of it drained out, so I just let the rest drain out, and I ordered some more coolant from Audi, which I will go pick up later today. So definitely don't recommend pulling that out just randomly, otherwise you too will have a huge mess. My garage is still all wet from last night. So With that being said, once you get these 3 lines out, there's only one more line that you need to take out, and that is from the top side. And that's the coolant return line. So these 3 were super easy to get to. The hardest bolt was this one, and it's all very easy. I think they're all Torx 30. So simple there. And then we go to the top. We go to the top, and I'll show you the coolant return line. The coolant return line is this one here, and I believe most people are disconnecting it. I don't know if you can see, but there's a, a spring clamp here. I think people are disconnecting it from there, but what I did was I undid the 6 bolts here and pushed the turbo forward, and you can see right here there's 2 lines for the coolant. The top is the feed, the bottom is the return. And so I just undid those 2 bolts from the turbo and popped those right out. And then now the turbo and manifold were completely free from the car. I haven't gotten it out yet, but I'm working on that now. And what I'm going to do to get that out is I'm going to take out all of the spark plug connectors here and the camshaft. I believe they're camshaft position sensors. Whatever those are, they're in the back. I took the connector out. I'm going to unscrew them with looks like a T25 or T30 probably, like everything else. And I'm going to take those out, and that should give me enough clearance to pull it out from the top. So once I get it out, I will take another video, and I did actually undo these bottom bolts, and I found out that you do not have to take these out. The manifold actually kind of just slides under those, so you don't need to take the bottom ones out to get the turbo out. I didn't know that, and I undid them, but they're totally fine where they are. I'll go ahead and screw these in before I put in the new turbo, because it should just slide right in there. So that will make it easy to get to. I guess if you have a problem getting the manifold out, taking those bolts off might make it easier, but definitely not necessary, so not going to sweat it. I'm just going to put them on and call it a day. Alright guys, as you can see, I got my stock turbo out, and here's the beautiful IMS 710 here, and I've already moved over the wastegate from my stock turbo to the new turbo, so I'm going to quickly go over how you can do that. It's all very easy. And so starting with the wastegate, it has a locking washer on here. I believe there is a tool to take those off, but it was pretty easy. You can see there's 2 grooves. You just I want to say gently, not damaging anything or yanking on it, but you know, stick your very small flathead in there, and you can kind of pop it out very easily. That came out easily. And then there's 2 10mm bolts, and so you just are nuts, and you just take those off, and then this whole assembly just slides right out. The only thing you want to be careful of is that you don't mess up this accordion style rubber guard here. That was pretty easy to get out. I just, you know, made sure I pulled it straight, and it came right out. And so went ahead and swapped that over, and I have also done the oil drain line. And so the oil drain line does have a gasket on it. You can see it there. The IMS kit did come with 1 gasket, but you need a gasket for both sides of the oil drain line. So make sure you retain your gaskets just in case, because you're not going to get 2 new ones, only 1. So I just went ahead and reused mine. It's a brand new turbo basically. I only have a couple thousand miles on mine, so I just reused it. Torqued that down. Don't torque it too tight. They were never on there that tight. It doesn't need to be, you know, extremely torqued down. I will post the exact torque specs. I don't remember them off the top of my head. It's been a couple days, but I'll post those in the description there. And so now I'm going to go to the oil feed line. And this is what I want to talk about, is that spacer that you can see on the end of there. This did come supplied with my IMS 710. I don't know if yours will. If it doesn't, great, but this was already attached to the turbo with a pre-supplied bolt. So what you want to do is go ahead and attach the spacer to the end of your oil feed line. Now the good news is these lines are very hard to mess up. They only fit in one direction. If you can see there, the place for the bolt is kind of at an angle and it's only going to go one direction. So you really can't mess it up. That's the way it goes. That washer will actually lock in over the corner of this hexagon here, and so that will go down very easily. And the same thing goes for the coolant feed and coolant drain line. I only have the coolant feed because the drain is actually still on the car. I didn't remove it, but same idea. It only goes one direction. I believe if you're facing the top of the car, then the feed line comes actually from the bottom and the drain line comes from the top. So I may have that reversed, but either way, you don't have to worry about it because it will not go the other way around. The orientation of these holes will only go one way. So, but I do think I got that right, and then after I go ahead and bolt up the rest of these lines, I'll be ready to put the turbo back in. Okay, so I got all the lines swapped over, the oil drain, coolant feed, oil feed. The IRS kit did supply 2 O-rings for the coolant turbo side. They do feel a little bit harder than the OEM ones, but the same size. So I went ahead and added those in there. And so my coolant return line is actually still on the car. So I added the O-ring to that, and I'm going to kind of tilt the turbo forward, install the coolant drain line, and bolt it up nice and tight. Again, not over torquing it. And I did take a little bit of DSG oil around the O-ring to lubricate it so that it pops in there nice and easy, because again, the IRAS O-ring is a little bit more stout than OEM, so I anticipate it being a little bit tighter of a fit as was the first one. One thing to note is I did have to play with this worm clamp a little bit and twist. This will actually twist right here, and I had to mess around with this a little bit because, as you can see, that that spring clamp, not worm clamp, spring clamp, was almost interfering with the housing of the turbine housing. So I had to squeeze it and try to move it out of the way a little bit so that this would fit flush with the bolt hole. And as you can see here, they're all just about pointing in the right direction. These are all 3 of them are flexible, so they have a little bit of play. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but you do want to get it, you know, as good as you can, because you don't want them to be kinked or anything like that. But not really a worry there because they're flexible, so shouldn't be a problem. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this back in the car, bolt up the coolant drain line, and then I will work on bolting up the turbo manifold. Alright guys, we're back next day. Excuse me, I got a mess over here. I was up till about 4 in the morning fighting with this, and it's not to discourage anyone. This is a learning process for me. Again, I'm not a mechanic, but hopefully I can save some of you guys time and try not to be intimidated, because despite my trouble, it's honestly not hard and outside of your reach. Just you know, got to learn my way through this. So the first thing, I don't know how it will be for your hybrid, but for mine, if you notice here, the coolant line holes are, I'll grab a screwdriver to show you the difference. This coolant line holes are significantly further apart on the hybrid. And so what happens is, this is one of the coolant line I have here. What happens is, when this goes in, one of the flanges will overlap the other flange. You can't put them both flat and snug against the turbo housing without one of the flanges sitting on top of the other one. So what's going to have to happen is, we're going to have to grind a little bit off of each flange to get them both to fit. It's really not much that you have to grind. It's maybe a millimeter or 2. So I've got like a millimeter off of each one, and then it would sit flat. And then also the OEM supplied bolts from my turbo were too long to go into the hybrid. I would torque them down, and the washer and the coolant line underneath would both move freely. So that's obviously a problem. I don't want it moving freely. I want it nice and snug. So I went to Home Depot and picked up a couple M6 by 1.0 by 10 millimeter depth, and I think you can actually even use 12 millimeter, but it looked very close. So I just went with the 10. I'm going to put some Loctite on it, and it should be good to go. You will need to get new bolts because the washers from the OEM bolts, which by the way don't come off, also will overlap each other. And I'll post some pictures of that. But yeah, that was my trouble. And one more thing about the coolant lines is I would recommend to take out the coolant line. I'll show you it right down there. It has a heat shield or fabric heat shield on it. I would recommend taking those off, because getting that coolant line back into the turbo while it's still on the car is extremely challenging, and grinding that down on the car is going to be more difficult too. The problem is Audi, in their amazing engineering skills, decided to put one Torx bolt on for one of the brackets that holds the coolant line on, and then they used a very odd size triple square for the other one. If you have a triple square set, then you would have no problem with that, but I am having trouble sourcing it locally, and unfortunately hadn't ordered it prior to this, so I was unable to get out that second bolt. So I am forced to put the coolant line back on while it's still on the car, and that I did get it once, and that's how I found out that the flanges were incompatible. So hopefully I can get it again. I'll be in my hood fighting with it again very soon, but I'm sure I'll be able to get it again. I just lubed it up with some DSG oil that I purchased because I lost a bunch of DSG oil from launching. So I've installed a catch can, and now I am ready to go. So I'm hoping that this is the last snag. Apart from this, everything should be fairly straightforward, plugging everything back up. So I'm going to go ahead and document that process. I'm going to grind this down. I'm going to reinstall the coolant lines. And I guess one more thing that I had trouble with was the rubber hose on the coolant line had a spring clamp on it, and even with the spring clamp closed, you could easily pull it off of this. It was very tight, but it just popped right off. So I went, IROS supplied what looks like a pretty beefy worm clamp, so I am going to just go ahead for safety measures and use the worm clamp, and this side of the spring clamp is totally stout. It's not moving at all, so I'm going to leave that side alone. I'm going to use the worm clamp for this side, and I think that's it. So hopefully I get this in today. Again, don't be too intimidated by all of this. It's not the end of the world. It's just learning my way through this. I don't know of another tutorial how to do this right now, and again, I'm not a mechanic, so don't be too intimidated or discouraged. I'm just very slow. So anyway, I'll be back soon. Alright ladies, I finally got it in. I just wanted to show you what I did here real quick while it's still in. So I actually was able to go ahead and grind actually, now that I think about it, I think the top one is the feed and the other one's the return. I'm actually not sure. All I know is when I unplugged this line, the coolant line on the left, I lost all my coolant. So whether that's the drain or the return is really no difference. These are the coolant lines. So if I got those wrong, I apologize. But nonetheless, the lines would not fit on the hybrid. So I don't know if you can see there, but I have grinded the flange down about 50% on each one. It was actually way more than I needed, but there's still plenty to bite on. And you can see the two black bolts that I got from Home Depot. They're M6-1.0 by 10 millimeter. And that worked perfectly. And so these two went in great. I'm super happy I was able to get that in. That should be, hopefully, the last hiccup that I have. So really good news. I'm going to go ahead and start to get this bolted up. And then one more thing to note is that worm clamp on the coolant line. I went ahead and put that on there. It is a very tight fit right there. Not even the hose wants to go on right there. So that worm clamp, I kind of had to tap it on with a screwdriver and a hammer. Had to tap it in to get it over the flange on the end of the metal pipe right there where the rubber hooks onto. And also for the coolant lines, they don't always want to seat down perfectly. So what I did was I just took a flathead on the very edge and then tapped on it with a hammer very lightly and pushed it down so it was seated properly, and then torqued it down. So I didn't torque it down if it wasn't completely flat inside the turbo. And yeah, so I'm sure torquing it down might be good enough, but I wanted to make sure that it was seated properly. So I did the same thing on both. If it wasn't flush with the turbo, I just tapped it down around the edges with this screwdriver, flathead, and a hammer, and that just seated it down right away. You want to be very careful that you do not break the O-rings. The ones that come in the turbo are very hard and stout, and they break because of that. So I actually had to reuse the OEM ones. I hope that they're good enough. I was told that they're good enough, so I guess we'll find out. If I have to pull this apart again, I'm probably going to cry. What's up, guys? So I finally got the oil and coolant lines hooked up both to the turbo and to the engine. So super happy about that. And again, you know, this is my first time doing it, so keep that in mind. This is not you know, for expert level. You probably don't need to watch this video, but if you're doing this for the first time like me, I'm hoping this will help you get to some of these lines. So that oil drain line right here was a pain. It took me quite a while, and there's a gasket. I used the IROS supplied gasket with the tabs on the bottom so I could see them. And what I did was I pre-threaded the bolts into the gasket, because the gasket fits around the bolt exactly. So you're going to want to pre-thread the gasket onto the bolts, and just so the bolts are sticking out from the line just a little bit, so that when you connect the oil feed to the car, so that it pops in the holes and kind of holds it in place, because there's tension on that rubber hose, and if you don't do it that way, it's a freaking nightmare. And this above, the coolant and the oil line up there up top, those were pretty easy. I did tap on them again, just like I did before with I used a very long pry bar, and I didn't tap very hard, didn't cause any damage, but I just wanted to seat that down. But honestly, those didn't really require much. So I am back in business. The turbo is in. Those lines are in, so I'm going to go now from the top, and I'm going to bolt in the plates on the turbo manifold. So everything is done from down here. Just going to pull out. Sorry about all the shaking, guys. And we have these two plates that go onto the turbo manifold. I'm just going to set that down. And so you have the manifold here. I have it just kind of not torqued down. I have one bolt on it. But as you can see in here, these plates will fit. Alright, boys. Got the turbo in, torque down. Turbo in, torque down. Go ahead and put the camshaft position sensors back in. Also, be careful when you're pulling the turbo in and out. You don't want to drop anything down into those camshaft position sensors, or you are going to have a pretty bad day. So make sure you don't do that. I'm going to go ahead and realign the downpipe now. Reconnect the mid pipes. Obviously connect the V-band. If you can, when you do the V-band, it's a good idea to tighten it up a little bit, tap around the ends of the V-band. It helps seat it a little better, and then tighten it down some more, and then tap around the V-band. It's really hard to get anything meaningfully heavy down inside the engine bay like that, but I was able to do it last time and tap it down, and you can see it when you tap it that it actually does bite down and clamp harder. So you do want to make sure that the exhaust has a good straight alignment, and that the V-band really gets the best possible hold that it can. And so that's why you want to do that. And then after that, I can't really think of anything that I've done up here that I haven't explained already. The coolant lines and all that stuff we talked about. So I believe that's it for the actual turbo install. So you know, it only took me about 3 days and a couple hospital trips, but I finally got it in. And so now the only goal is to put the car back together without any extra pieces. And so that would be a major accomplishment in my opinion. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. It was very challenging, not hard, but very tedious in some spots. And so if you're doing this for the first time, definitely prepare for at least a couple days. Now you may be able to do it much faster than me. Probably most people do things much faster than me, but when I'm going through this process, I want to do everything right. And so there was no documentation for me that I could find, so I just kind of had to go with the help of the community. And I just wanted to thank Hank Iraz, George from Malacca Motorsports, Adam Bortz, Brian Saxon, and everybody else who helped me. If I forgot you, I'm so sorry. Oh, Josh Pelkman, all those guys, I probably bugged the crap out of them during this install, and they were all very awesome in helping me out. So thank you to you guys for that, because I was pretty frustrated during many parts of this install. But so far everything is coming together, and I cannot wait to try this out. Alright guys, I'm at the final steps. I'm not going to go over the rest because obviously if you took it off, you know how to put everything back together. So far everything's going good. I just wanted to note one thing that I had trouble with, and that was the new Unitronic 4-inch adapter. You know, it comes with two O-rings. One goes on the inside of the flange on the adapter, and the other one goes on the outside. And the one that's on the inside is the one I had trouble with because it didn't want to stick to the walls. It kept wanting to droop down in one spot, and actually when I pinched it onto the turbo the first time, I broke the first O-ring. Now luckily I had another one from my old adapter, so this time I very carefully did it. And what I did was I took the hybrid Unitronic adapter and I attached it to the turbo by itself, and I started from the top and I used my finger on the inside to feel where the rubber O-ring was coming out of the hole, and I used my fingernail to stuff it back in the hole and ease it onto the turbo until it easily popped on. If you're getting a lot of resistance, you're about to break the O-ring. So you need to stick your finger in there or something and just kind of push it back into the crevice where the O-ring goes. And then so that adapter was on the turbo, and then I took the elbow inlet and wrapped it around and very carefully tightened the top bolt just a smidge, then went to the bottom, tightened it a little bit, and went back and forth so it would very gently pull the intake adapter inwards. Because if you're not careful, what will happen is you'll go to stick the adapter onto, or you'll go to stick the inlet onto the adapter and it will pull it right off the turbo, and you'll have to start right over. So unless you have a bunch of O-rings, I recommend being super careful with that part. I finally got it on. It probably took me a good 30-40 minutes to do it because I kept having to go from the bottom to the top. But with that, I hope that you found this video helpful, and yeah, I'm not going to show any more. I'll definitely update you guys on how awesome. I'm sure this is going to be a absolutely fantastic turbo. I'm going with the Unitronic 710H tune, and I'm super excited. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you have anything that you would have done differently or would have done better, feel free to drop it in the comment section, and I hope you all had a great holiday, and I'll talk to you later.
It's alive! It's alive!